What is behavioral science really? Because you think, ooh, science, is it white lab coats and test tubes? And do I need a master's or a PhD to understand this? And the truth is, behavioral science is simply the study of how people behave, or more specifically, why they do what they do. And what behavioral scientists have found is really very interesting, because what they found is people don't often make decisions. Instead, what we do is we rely on decision-making shortcuts. We just default to these hardwired behaviors. It's a way for people to conserve mental energy, and this is something that humans have developed over the ages, right? Where we really try to conserve mental energy. If we tried to weigh every piece of information before we made a decision, we'd never get around to making a decision, right? So we've developed these hardwired behaviors. We cruise along through life on autopilot, and we see a certain situation, and we just default to these hardwired behaviors, these automatic, instinctive, reflexive behaviors. So it presents a huge opportunity for us as marketers, because if we know that, if somebody sees X, they're very likely to do Y, and we want them to do Y, well, then let's make sure we show them X, right? So if we know that people are going to use these decision-making shortcuts, we can kind of get out ahead of that, build it into our marketing strategies and into our creative executions, and make sure that we put those right prompts or nudges in place that will make it more likely that people will do what we ask them to do. There's, of course, no magic wand. There's no silver bullet. I can't make you do something you don't want to do. But if I properly create a marketing message, if I use the right frames and phrases and words and design, I can make it more likely that you'll notice it, that you'll understand it, and that you'll respond to it. So we had this particular assignment, and I said, all right, we're going to really use behavioral science. And the assignment was to sell, buckle up, this is really exciting. The assignment was to sell insurance to dentists. Right? Very exciting. Life insurance and dentist. But actually, it was very interesting, because what the assignment was they had already sold the dentist a policy, but now they're trying to get them to upgrade the policy. And the truth of the matter is, it's really hard to sell anybody life insurance. No one wants to think they're going to die, right? Nobody wants to think they're going to die. You always think, I have time to deal with this later. You kick the can down the road. No one wants to, no one wants to make the decision. So I said, here's a perfect opportunity to use something that Dr. Cialdini wrote about in his book called the pull of the magnetic middle. And what he said was, very often, people don't like to be lagging behind, nor do we really like to be out on the bleeding edge. What we like is to be in the middle. We feel comfortable in the middle. We feel that's a safe place to be. So what we did, Nikki, is we put this graph together. And on the graph we had, on one end, it was $0, the least insurance you could possibly have. And at the other end was $3 million. That was the most this particular company sold at the time. And then we put a little caret on the graph that said, you are here, right? A little marker that said, you are here. And we only chose people who had less than $1.5 million, right? So it was always going to be left of center. Because if you had 0, 1.5 would be in the center, and then 3 would be at the other end. So, and there were quite a few people that had less than 1.5. So at a glance, when they just looked at the messaging, they saw themselves left of center. They saw themselves lagging behind. And we didn't expect that they would go, oh my gosh, I should quickly buy insurance and get all the way to the 3 million. But what we did think would happen is that they would buy some more insurance to move themselves closer to that 1.5, that middle mark. And that's exactly what they did. They got like a 459% lift over their previous control. There's something that behavioral scientists refer to as cognitive fluency, and it's a mouthful of a phrase, but it really means that people prefer things that are easier to think about and easier to understand. Not only do they prefer things that are easier to think about and easier to understand, they actually judge those things to be more accurate, more truthful, more believable, and as a result, they're more persuasive. And people feel more confident in their ability to make a decision when something is cognitively fluent, when they feel that they understand it. So, one of the things that we want to do as marketers is we want to make sure that our messages are easy to understand. And so that means really kind of walking away from acronyms and jargon and buzz phrases and long, complicated sentences and thick paragraphs and, that wall of copy that comes at you. And instead, we want to use language that's very accessible, that's easy to understand. Sometimes, particularly in B2B, we think, we have to be speaking in a very sophisticated way because, we're talking to educated people in a business environment, and that's what they expect. And the truth is, there have been a number of studies that show that even among very educated people, they prefer things that are easier to think about and easier to understand. There's a researcher named Oppenheimer, and he took abstracts from PhD theses, and anytime he found a word that was longer than, I think it was 9 letters, he replaced it with a shorter synonym. And then, so he had, the original work, and then he had the work with the shorter synonyms. And he had people, read. And what they found was they rated the work that had the shorter words in it as easier to understand, as more informative, as preferable, and most importantly, they rated the author as more intelligent. So a lot of times in marketing we think, oh, we have to use these big words because we won't sound smart, and the exact opposite can be true. When we make it easy for our audience to understand what we're saying, what we're offering, what we're selling, they appreciate that, and they have a tendency to find it easier to absorb, and as a result, more believable, more credible. Another thing that we do in marketing is we double down on benefits, but behavioral scientists will tell us that people are twice as motivated to avoid the pain of loss as they are to achieve the pleasure of gain. So here we are doubling down on benefits, the gains, the benefits, the advantages, all the wonderful things that will happen if you just, click this button, click this link, pick up the phone and call me, walk into my store, whatever it happens to be, if you just say yes to me. And I'm not saying that benefits don't work. I am not telling your audience to walk away from benefits, but what I am saying is a little well-placed loss aversion can go a long way. So instead of saying, take advantage of our sale, you might want to say, don't miss our sale, right? Don't miss or don't miss out on can be so much more powerful than take advantage of. Instead of saying, you can save today, you might want to say, prices go up tomorrow, right? These little differences in phrasing can really make a difference, because people are like, oh, prices go up tomorrow? All right, I better act now. Whereas when you say save today, yes, people love to save, no question about it, but it doesn't quite have the same impact or the same motivation to get people to move. What I always tell my clients, not that they need to be told because my clients are good clients, but what I always tell people is, treat your customers the way you would want to be treated. Don't say something to them that you wouldn't say to your kids or your spouse or your parents. You want to be ethical about it. You want to be responsible about it. You don't want to misuse it. You don't want to lie. You don't want to mislead people. But if you can honestly say this, if it's true, if it's not going to cause harm to the person, if they take the action you're asking them to take, these are the questions we want to ask ourselves. And, I would imagine that most people would say, okay, yes, this is honest, this is truthful, I'm not trying to cause harm. And so, as a result, we can properly deploy behavioral science. And I think that, that's a way to answer the question about ethics. Can it be misapplied? Can people use it nefariously? Yes, absolutely. Just like they can spam, just like they can, lie, just like they can create shoddy products that fall apart after a week. I mean, there are bad players, bad actors out there, bad apples in the bunch, whatever analogy you want to use, There are people that will find ways to misuse whatever is out there, whether it's technology or whether it's a behavioral science principle. And, I would just encourage people to not do that, because, you may get a short-term win, but in the long term, it's not going to help your customers, and it's certainly not going to help you.